Okay, so what we're going to look at now, everybody, is the case of externalities and what is known as quasi-public goods. Okay, so we'll just move to our next slide and just get rid of the negative externality.
It was a positive one, we laughed.
Okay, so we can't see the screen. That's excellent. Oh, now we can. So, externalities. So, as you should know by now, the externalities are the unintended side effects of an economic activity. Okay? So, for example, an economic activity might be a teacher teaching a class and then a big loud noise affects the class next door. That's a negative externality. Speaking of negative, externalities can be positive or negative. Positive externalities, unintended benefits to a third party, to another person that's not involved in a transaction or an activity. For example, an energy company replaces overhead electricity lines with underground lines. Maybe it's easier to reduce the damage. And so they do that for a private reason, to reduce their cost of production, but it has the unintended side effects of improving the aesthetic environment, the way the environment looks. Okay, so that's a positive externality. So obviously the people who live in the area, they've got a nicer view. They're also known as what? Free riders. Very good. I like your enthusiasm. Okay. So some images. There's the power line. There's no power line.
Forget
that. It's just a different angle. All right. Negative externalities. Obviously, have unintended negative side effects of an economic activity. So again, when an action has been created that creates a cost to a third party. So the toy factory, which you would have seen in the one of the previous clips, produces profits for owners, so that's a private benefit. Toys for kids, so they get the utility or the satisfaction, so that's a private benefit. But it also emits pollution into a local river that poisons fish, so that means that the local fisheries reduce their fish catch, and so that also increases health costs to the community that might eat the fish or that might swim in the river, and so they are unintended consequences of the activity. So the toy factory, you don't decide, oh, I'm going to invest in a toy factory so that I can poison the local community and make a profit, all right? That is an unfortunate side effect. Now, we might think in some cases that businesses know very well that that's exactly what they're doing, and because there's no consequence, because they don't have to pay for it, they don't do anything about it. That's probably true in many cases, but the main reason that they are producing the toys is because they want to provide a good to sell to people to earn revenue to make a profit. And the third or the external consequence is that it has negative social but also economic costs for other people. Got it? Okay. So dead fish, for example.
Something else for a second.
And then you start thinking, what is that going to do socially but also economically to this person's livelihood, providing for their family and so forth, all right? So it's going to involve social costs to them, but also social costs include those external economic costs, loss of income, for example. Okay. All right, now, measuring negative externalities. I'm about to give you a handout that uses a graph like this, so I just want to explain this to you, so you need to look carefully at it. This is, in fact, a demand and supply curve graph, all right? So your blue line that slopes downwards to the right is what? It's a demand curve. it's labelled MPB, marginal private benefit, and that really just means that at every price, consumers will make a decision on how much they will demand because of the benefit it gets to them, all right? So the demand curve really shows what's the extra benefit that goes to people from buying that good, okay? The red, if you look at the first red line, labelled MPC, that stands for marginal private costs. That's, what curve is that? Supply curve, yeah, the supply curve. Good, Stan, good, Aidan. It's the supply curve, okay? And the supply curve is worked out by a firm by working out at each possible price, how much am I going to produce? And they work that out by saying, okay, well, how much is it going to cost me? So they have to add up their wages, their electricity bills, the paint, the glue that they're going to have to use, etc., etc. And then they, of course, add a margin for profit. That's also part of cost of production. And then they work out how much they will produce at each possible price. And so your private costs are quantified in a supply curve, whereas your private benefits are quantified in a demand curve. Okay? Now, you can use a graph like this, or you can use simple demand and supply curves if you're talking about this kind of stuff. It doesn't really matter. Obviously, this is a little bit more sort of extra economics terminology when you use terms like marginal social cost and marginal profit benefit. But you can also use, for example, supply curve, in brackets, private costs, demand curve, private benefits. Okay? That's up to you. But what happens then with our original MPC curve, which is the marginal private cost curve or supply curve, you get an equilibrium of this Q here. And you can see there's no price label there, but you can see that there's a lower price. If there is a way to quantify, and you're all going to think, how do you do it? Yeah, it's hard. But if there is a way to actually put a price or a cost on, all right, what is the cost per toy to the local fisheries? What is the cost in terms of health costs caused by this contamination of the river in the community? If you're able to A, measure it scientifically, and then B, put a price on it economically and statistically, then what you can do in theory is you can actually add that to the supply curve, so that when you're adding up your costs at each price, and you go, okay, wages, rent, electricity, glue, paint, and external costs. So it's one more cost that you're adding. So clearly at every price, it's going to cost a little bit more. And so classic economics, your supply curve will shift to the left. Do you notice that it's a different angle as well? It's a bit of a steeper angle. Anyone want to have a guess at why the marginal social cost, which includes the private and the external environmental costs, why that might also be a bit steeper?
Law of supply?
No, the law of supply shows why it slopes upwards to the right. Okay, so as price increases, cost increases. But what do you think happens to environmental costs? Sorry, as production increases, costs. What do you think happens to environmental costs versus other costs as you produce more? Impact on the environment. What do you think? Think about the river.
They exacerbate.
Yeah, they exacerbate. They increase at a faster rate.
So logarithmic function.
Logarithmic function, everybody. Awesome. Okay, so they increase at a faster rate. So if you kept pumping chemicals into that river where the fisherman was before, you might start off with just a few weird looking fish or a few sick fish, and then more and more chemicals. The fish get sicker. And in fact, at the moment in Australia, the Australian oyster industry is in areas of Australia is under really big pressure because of this kind of stuff. So the more you damage the environment, the damage actually increases at potentially an exponential rate. All right, big numeracy word from Miss O'Neill. Woohoo. Okay, so this is a graph that we can use to show a couple of things. One, to show negative externalities and their the way that they actually impose a bigger cost to society. But two, later on when we look at, all right, so what should we do about this kind of stuff? Well, we could actually look at ways, how could we make businesses actually pay for the true environmental costs of what they do, and what would be the implications of that? And indeed, should we do that? Those kind of questions. Got it? Okay. I'm going to stop there.